Welcome to Han's Story, where we bring you haunting fictional tales, mysterious disappearances, long-forgotten secrets, and unsettling truths that resurface years later. Today's story will take you back to a wedding night that ended in silence, and a discovery nearly 2 decades later that left an entire town stunned. The following story is a work of fiction. All characters, locations, and events are entirely made up for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to actual persons, places, or real-life incidents is purely coincidental. Please do not associate this story with real-world crimes or individuals. If you enjoy eerie, slow-burning mysteries like this one, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Han's Story, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's buried beneath the surface in our next story. Share this with someone who thinks wedding nights are always the beginning of a happily ever after. Winderley, Oregon, September 12, 1993. The night had all the marks of perfection. Lanterns swayed gently in the early autumn breeze, laughter spilled from the windows of the chapel's reception hall, and somewhere near the oak tree, the echo of a slow waltz still lingered in the grass. Daniel and Marissa Claymore had just been pronounced husband and wife. Childhood friends turned lovers, they were the kind of couple that small towns adored, soft-spoken, kind, and beautiful, in the quiet, ordinary way that made them feel like they had always belonged to one another. He was 27, just finished with a master's degree in forestry, and she was 25, newly hired at Winderley Elementary. They planned to spend their honeymoon in a lakeside cabin just 10 miles up the road. It was close enough to be convenient, far enough to feel like an escape. Everything was planned. Everything had gone exactly as it should. At 11:16 p.m., the couple waved goodbye to the last group of guests. Marissa still had her veil on loosely pinned behind her shoulder, and Daniel carried the bouquet she'd nearly forgotten. Witnesses said they laughed as they climbed into Daniel's green Chevy pickup and headed north into the dark. No one ever saw them again. When sunrise came and the Claymores hadn't called, concern turned into worry. By noon, Daniel's parents contacted the sheriff. Deputies visited the cabin. First, the door was locked, the bed untouched, the champagne still resting on ice. There were no tire tracks, no footprints, and no trace that anyone had arrived. Helicopters flew overhead that afternoon. Dive teams searched the river. Canines traced a scent to the roadside, then lost it completely. It was as if the forest had opened its arms and taken them. No leads, no ransom, no witnesses, no goodbye. Weeks passed. Rumors flared and faded. People spoke of secret affairs, foul play, even an old legend of the bride by the water, a ghost tale mothers whispered to daughters to warn them about rushing into marriage. But in the end, the files were closed. Unsolved. A ceremony was held in early November with 2 white roses, a quiet vigil, and an empty casket. On the chapel door, someone pinned a note in neat cursive, "Love doesn't end. It waits." Years went by. Winderley changed like all places do. The river shifted. The roads were repaved. People moved on. Until July of 2012, when the Tarlow River dropped to its lowest level in decades due to a summer drought. A conservation crew was assigned to dredge the lower curve beneath Old Reading Bridge, a place long since closed to cars half swallowed by ivy and rust. Around 9:40 a.m. on a Wednesday, a young intern named Leon Mertz noticed something pale protruding from the muck. He thought it was garbage, at first a tarp or bag tangled in rebar. He reached down to pull it free and froze. The fabric that emerged was delicate, heavy, and unmistakably white. He called for help. 2 men waded into the river and assisted in lifting the object, a wedding dress nearly immaculate. The lace was intact, the pearls still stitched in neat rows along the sleeves. It was folded neatly as though carefully preserved and wrapped in the arms of a black tuxedo. The 2 outfits were clipped together with an old hanger as if someone had simply left them behind after dry cleaning. But they hadn't. They had been submerged underwater for 19 years. The garments were bagged and sent to the state lab. Forensics ran a series of tests. No blood, no tears, no decay, consistent with nearly 2 decades underwater. The fabric was dry deep in the folds, as if untouched by time. Experts said the preservation was impossible. Under magnification, there was no sign of mold mildew or thread rot. The only irregularity, a strand of hair caught in the neckline of the wedding dress. Long brown, slightly curled. DNA analysis confirmed it didn't belong to Marissa Claymore nor to anyone in the National Registry. Meanwhile, the town began to murmur. One elderly woman claimed she saw a young man, thin, tired-looking, with sad eyes, standing beneath the oak tree behind the chapel just days after the discovery. She insisted it was Daniel, though he looked older, like a ghost still wearing his face. A local barista swore she served coffee to a woman in a wedding dress 3 mornings in a row, always at dawn, always without speaking. The security cameras from the conservation crew's trailer were checked, and at 4:44 a.m. on July 21st, they captured a figure in white standing motionless on the rocks beside the river for nearly 7 minutes. The footage distorted. The next frame, she was gone. People began visiting the river again. Not tourists, locals. Quiet, uneasy, drawn by something unspoken. The Claymore case was reopened unofficially. A retired detective who once worked the original file received a letter in a plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked from Winderley. Inside was a single sentence written in old-fashioned ink. They never left. And beneath it, a photocopy of a page from an old guest book, the one from Daniel and Marissa's wedding. Every name was blurred, smeared, except for one. Marissa Claymore. The letter lay on the kitchen counter like something alive. Detective Richard Halbrook had read it 10 times already, and each time his eyes returned to that single, deliberate sentence they never left. The handwriting was almost ornamental, inked in a rich, dark tone that bled ever so slightly into the paper. No postmark except for the word Winderley stamped faintly like it regretted being there. No fingerprints, no additional message. Just that line and the copy of the Claymore guest book page, a page he hadn't seen since the week the couple vanished. It had been nearly 20 years since Halbrook had worked the Claymore case. Back then, he'd only been in his 30s, eager, maybe too eager. He remembered the desperation of those first weeks after the wedding. The media had latched onto the story with sharp teeth. The honeymoon that never began. They called it. The parents were frantic. Volunteers searched day and night. But it all went cold. And that haunted him more than any homicide he'd worked, because this was the kind of case that didn't end. It just dissolved. Now retired and living alone in a quiet suburb an hour from Winderley, Halbrook had spent the last few years doing crossword puzzles and nursing old regrets. Until now. The letter felt like a second chance, or a trap. He packed a small bag that night and drove out early the next morning. As he crossed the familiar county line, memories returned like ghosts, the winding back roads, the dense pine corridors, the sleepy gas stations with their broken vending machines. Winderley hadn't changed much. It still looked like a postcard that someone forgot to mail. He parked near the chapel just before dusk. The lot was empty, except for a silver bike leaning against the fence. The building itself had weathered surprisingly well. Ivy curled along the steeple. The oak tree behind it had grown massive roots thick enough to break the earth. It was the same tree Daniel had proposed beneath a detail no one outside the family should have known. And yet beneath that tree something caught his eye, a small piece of folded white cloth wedged beneath the lowest branch. He hesitated, then picked it up. It was lace the same pattern found on Marissa's wedding dress. Pristine. Not yellowed or brittle. Still soft to the touch. He stood there alone in the growing twilight staring at the fabric. The air around him seemed wrong too, still too quiet. Not the kind of silence that came from absence, but the kind that felt arranged. At the sheriff's office, he met with Deputy Lily Anson, a woman in her late 20s who'd taken over much of the local paperwork. She hadn't been born when the Claymores disappeared, but she knew the story. Everyone did. I saw the dress, she said quietly. It didn't look right. The preservation, it wasn't natural. Halbrook nodded. I saw the footage from July 21st, the woman on the rocks. Lily pulled up her phone. I brought the raw file. Look at the timestamp. He did. 4:44 a.m. Exactly the same time he'd had his first dream about Marissa in over a decade. In that dream, she stood at the river's edge, whispering something he couldn't hear. He hadn't told anyone that. There's more, Lily said, pulling out a file. After the dress was found, we received 3 anonymous calls over the next 10 days. All from payphones, yeah, those still exist in some towns. The voice was scrambled, but the message was always the same. They're still waiting. The vows were never broken. Halbrook's mouth went dry. That was a phrase Marissa had once written on a napkin during the original investigation. Vows don't break, not if they're real. It was a detail not released to the press. I think someone's playing with us, Lily said. I think someone's trying to finish the story, Halbrook answered. That night, Halbrook checked into the Winderley Inn. Room 3A, same one he'd stayed in back in '93. He placed the lace cloth on the desk and stared at it for a long time. The more he looked, the more it seemed to shimmer under the lamp like it remembered something. At precisely 2:12 a.m. the phone rang. He answered, heart-thudding. There was no voice, just the sound of water, slowly moving. Then a click. He didn't sleep after that. The next morning, he returned to Old Reading Bridge. The river had dropped further, exposing more of the jagged stone beneath. A group of children were skipping rocks upriver, but otherwise the area was deserted. Until he noticed someone standing in the tree line across the bank, a woman pale, unmoving, dressed in white. He called out. She didn't respond. He stepped onto the bridge, but by the time he reached the center, she was gone. He scanned the mud where the clothes had been found. Something was poking out again, not fabric, this time metal. He climbed down the embankment and knelt in the sludge, digging carefully. What emerged was a rusted music box engraved with initials D+M. The lid was sealed tight. He took it back to the motel and forced it open with a pocket knife. Inside was a tiny photograph, black and white, clearly aged, of Daniel and Marissa, standing not in wedding clothes, but in what looked like early 20th century attire. Daniel wore suspenders. Marissa had a lace parasol. Behind them, the chapel. And beneath the photo, one word etched into the bottom panel of the box. Again. Halbrook stared at the photo. It was impossible. Yet the faces were unmistakable. It was them. As they were, and somehow also as they had been before. Time, it seemed, was not as straight as everyone thought. The vows were never broken. And the river had not finished telling its story. Rain tapped against the motel window in an irregular rhythm like a broken lullaby. Halbrook sat on the edge of the bed, the music box still open in his lap, its photo lying beside his watch. He hadn't slept. He hadn't even tried. The image inside the box haunted him, Daniel and Marissa, unmistakably them, but dressed as if they'd lived 100 years ago. There was no way to explain it. The more he stared, the more his mind fought to reconcile the impossible. Either someone was orchestrating the most elaborate hoax he'd ever seen, or time had fractured. At 7:14 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Halbrook opened it to find Deputy Lily Anson holding a small manila envelope. I think you need to see this, she said. We had the lace you found tested overnight. I sent it straight to the state lab. She handed him the report. Halbrook scanned it quickly. No contaminants, no modern textile markers. The thread structure matched hand-woven cotton linen blend, dated according to carbon test range to the early 1900s. That's not all, Lily said. There was DNA embedded in the fibers, female consistent with the sample found on the wedding dress. Still not Marissa Claymore, still no match on national records. But we found something else this morning, and this is where it gets weirder. She handed him a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a small card, slightly damp, etched in silver foil. It was a wedding invitation. You are joyfully invited to the union of Daniel Claymore and Marissa Ashby. to be held on September 12, 1912 at Winderley Chapel, Oregon. Reception to follow beneath the oak. Halbrook blinked. Ashby, he whispered. Marissa's maiden name was Tellington. I thought the same, so I called our historical archive. Guess what? Lily said, voice shaky. There was a couple named Daniel Claymore and Marissa Ashby who got married here, exactly 100 years before the 1993 wedding. And she pulled out another sheet. They vanished too. Same day, same place. Never found. A cold shiver passed down Halbrook's spine. Are you saying? I'm saying we might be looking at a loop, or something repeating. Halbrook sank into the motel chair, heart pounding. Why now? Why resurface in 2012? Maybe the river dropping exposed something that wasn't meant to be seen, or maybe they were waiting. Later that afternoon, Halbrook and Lily returned to the riverbank. The sky was overcast, the water low and sluggish. Near where the dress had been found, they spotted something new, a shallow depression in the mud rectangular in shape. A shovel was fetched. Within an hour, they unearthed a second music box, this one rusted nearly through. Inside was another photo, this time of a different couple, a man with dark skin in a gray suit and a woman with long black braids in a white dress with sleeves to her wrists. The backdrop was the same, the chapel, the oak tree. Lily turned the photo over. Written in pencil, 1932. Harold and Elise. The vows will bring us home. Another couple, Halbrook whispered. Another time. That night, Halbrook sat with every file from the Claymore case spread across the motel desk. He cross-referenced dates, maps, names, even church registries. The same names, different faces, different eras. Every 20 years, give or take. Couples vanishing. Always newlyweds. Always after the ceremony. Never found. His heart sank as a realization settled in his bones. The chapel wasn't just a place of marriage. It was a doorway. Lily came by around midnight with another discovery. I dug into the old guest book archives, physical copies, the dusty kind. Look at this. She handed him a scanned page from the 1912 ceremony. Marissa Ashby's name was signed in delicate ink, but just beneath it, barely visible in smudged graphite, were the words, "Remember us when the river breathes again." That phrase, that same kind of language from the anonymous calls. Halbrook's phone buzzed. An email. No sender, no subject. Just a time-stamped link to a live camera feed. The angle looked familiar, facing the oak tree from inside the chapel. It was dark, grainy, nothing unusual. Until two figures appeared. A man and a woman, standing hand in hand beneath the branches, dressed in wedding attire. Daniel, Marissa. They didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there motionless, as though waiting for something or someone. Halbrook reached for his coat. He didn't know if he believed in time slips or curses or interdimensional traps, but he believed in Daniel and Marissa. He believed they didn't just vanish, they were taken, or called, and maybe now they were asking for help, or warning others. As he and Lily stepped outside, wind began to stir around them. The motel sign flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a soft melody played, faint but clear like a music box winding down. The chapel was waiting. And this time, they were going in. The road to the chapel looked different at night. Trees leaned in tighter. The air had weight. The tires of Lily's cruiser crunched along the gravel like bones underfoot. Halbrook sat in the passenger seat, gripping the photo from the music box like a relic. In the back seat, both music boxes lay wrapped in towels. Somehow they felt warmer than they should, as if they were pulsing. The headlights swept across the front steps of the Winderley Chapel. The building stood in perfect stillness, like it had been holding its breath for 100 years. As they approached, the air grew colder. Not the kind of chill that came with elevation or weather. This was old cold, generational, like stepping into a memory someone forgot to bury. Halbrook hesitated at the door. Something's watching, he murmured. Lily drew her sidearm without speaking. The old hinges groaned as Halbrook pushed open the door. Inside, dust and silence ruled. The The stained glass windows glimmered faintly with moonlight, casting fractured colors across the pews. Then they saw it on the altar. A third music box, smaller than the others, covered in dark velvet tied with a blue ribbon. Neither of them moved. "I didn't put that there," Lily whispered. "Neither did I," Halbrook said. And then the chapel breathed. It wasn't imagination. The wooden beams creaked inward. The candles on the side altar flickered without wind. Somewhere above, footsteps moved across the rafters, soft, deliberate, and wrong. Halbrook reached for the box. His fingers trembled as he untied the ribbon and opened the lid. This time there was no photo. Only a scrap of paper and an old wedding ring, dull silver, engraved inside with the initials E+J 1893. On the paper, a sentence written in the same ink as the letter from Part 1. "She comes when vows are broken." Lily stepped back instinctively. "Who's she?" Before Halbrook could answer, the organ behind them let out a moan, not music but air moving through a corpse. They turned. At the far end of the chapel, beneath the stained glass window of the weeping angel, a figure stood. Dressed in blackface, covered by a lace veil, motionless. Not Marissa. Not Elise. Something else entirely. Lily raised her weapon. "Identify yourself." The figure didn't move. But the veil rippled slightly, as though something underneath it had too many eyes. Halbrook's breath caught in his throat. "No sudden moves," he whispered. "Don't shoot." "I'm not planning to, but I'm not putting it down either." Then the figure spoke, not with sound, but with vibration. A word pushed into their minds like a needle into fabric, unfinished. The candles blew out, and the chapel snapped. Not physically, not yet. But time twisted. The pews groaned as wood aged backward. The crucifix above the pulpit melted into the wood like wax. The air smelled of roses and rot. Halbrook looked at Lily. She was flickering like a bad signal. Then his own hands, they too, were blurred. Time wasn't breaking. It was choosing. The floor beneath them cracked with sound, and the figure in black stepped forward. With each footfall, petals appeared on the floor, white lilies rotting at the edges. It stopped at the center aisle and slowly extended a hand. It pointed at Halbrook. Then at Lily. Then at the chapel door, which now hung open to a different landscape. Instead of the parking lot and trees, they saw a graveyard fog-drenched old with crooked stones. A wedding arch stood in the center, vines choking its frame. And beneath it stood Daniel and Marissa, side by side, eyes pleading, mouths sealed shut. The figure whispered again, louder this time, not in words, but in understanding. "Make the vows right." And just like that, the vision disappeared. The chapel returned. Lily gasped. Her knees buckled and Halbrook steadied her. "What the hell was that?" Halbrook didn't answer right away. He walked slowly to the altar and picked up the velvet box. Inside, the wedding ring was warm. "I don't think we're dealing with a loop," he said quietly. "I think we're dealing with a collection." Lily frowned. "What?" "This entity, this presence, it's drawn to vows, to love bound by ritual. But it doesn't want the celebration, it wants the commitment, the binding part. And when something interrupts that, when a wedding is broken or stolen or cursed, it takes the couple into itself, into its time. You're saying this thing feeds on marriage, feeds on what marriage represents, eternal promises, bound souls, and maybe even guilt." Lily sat on the nearest pew, visibly shaking. "What do we do?" Halbrook stared at the altar. "We give it what it wants. Or we end the ritual it started. But we need to find out how it began. And that means going back further, before Marissa and Daniel, before Elise and Harold, back to 1893, to E+J. He held up the ring again. Its silver shimmered faintly, almost eagerly. "We need to find out who the first bride was," he said, "and why her vow was never fulfilled." Outside, the wind rose. In the trees, something sang, a wedding hymn broken out of tune, but unmistakably familiar. A marriage was left unfinished, and the bride was still waiting. The Halbrook case notes were now a mess of timelines, old wedding records, and faded photographs spread across the motel desk like a jigsaw puzzle missing its edges. The only constant was a single looping date, September 12th. No matter the year 1893, 1912, 1932, 1993, every couple vanished on that same day. Lily sat across from him, her laptop open to a scan of the Winderley County Registry from the late 1800s. She looked pale, exhausted, but her voice was steady when she said, "I found them." Halbrook looked up sharply. Who? E and J, the initials in the ring. Their names were Eleanor Whitgrave and Jonathan Bellamy. Married September 12, 1893. Eleanor was from Winderley, her family built the chapel. Jonathan was from New Haven, Connecticut. Their wedding was supposed to be the grandest event the town had ever seen. What happened? Lily turned the laptop toward him. On screen was a faded newspaper article from the Winderley Gazette dated September 14, 1893. The headline read, "Local heiress disappears during wedding night. Groom nowhere to be found." The photo beneath showed a younger Eleanor, striking solemn standing beneath the same oak tree that still towered behind the chapel. The article reported that after the ceremony, the couple was seen walking toward the riverbank for private wedding portraits. They never returned. Search parties combed the area for days. Nothing was ever found. No clothes, no bodies, no blood. They were the first, Lily whispered. The very first pair. Halbrook's eyes were dark, or the first to vanish this way. What if the entity was born that night? Lily frowned. How would that happen? Think about it, a bride full of joy, a family legacy tied to that chapel, a wedding meant to be perfect. And something went wrong. What if Eleanor never made it to the altar? What if the vows weren't completed, and something inside her refused to accept that? You think she's the one in black? I think she became the first ghost in the vow. They sat in silence, the weight of it hanging between them like humidity. Then Halbrook stood up. We need to go to the old Whitgrave house. What? The family estate. It's still standing, right? Sort of. It's been boarded up since the 70s, off Highway 12 down by Crowsfield Hollow. Halbrook was already grabbing his coat. Then let's go. If Eleanor started this, she left something behind. The drive took an hour. Crowsfield Hollow was swampy and quiet, the road narrowing to a single lane bordered by dying trees. The Whitgrave mansion emerged like a corpse pulled from the deep 3 stories of rotting wood windows, like blind eyes' porch sagging with time. Lily parked and killed the engine. Trespassing, she asked. We're beyond that, Halbrook muttered. They pushed through the front door, its frame swollen with decades of storms. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old perfume. Wallpaper curled like dead leaves. The furniture was shrouded in moth-eaten sheets. A cracked painting of Eleanor stared down at them from the foyer, her eyes somehow more vivid than the rest of her. They searched room by room until Halbrook found it. The bridal suite. Everything was still there. The vanity with its silver brush set a half-burned candle, a lace handkerchief monogrammed E.W. And on the wall, nailed in with tarnished hooks, hung Eleanor's wedding dress, untouched, preserved in a kind of reverence that was more shrine than memory. And beneath it on the floor a journal. Halbrook picked it up carefully. The pages were stiff ink, faded but readable. He sat cross-legged and read aloud as Lily hovered near the doorway. August 3rd, 1893. He smiled at me today in the chapel, and I thought, this is the man who will promise me forever. Jonathan has a poet's heart. I wonder if the oak will bloom brighter when we speak our vows. August 17th. Father says the river rises strange in September. He told me not to linger near it after dark. I think he's just afraid of ghosts. I'd marry Jonathan in the river itself if it meant escaping this house. September 12th. I waited beneath the oak. The guests had begun to whisper. Jonathan was late then later. When the church bells stopped, I knew he was not coming. But I said the words anyway. I spoke my vows aloud to the empty altar. And something answered. Lily shivered. Is there more? Halbrook flipped the last page. The writing was hurried, smeared. I can feel it inside the chapel walls. A mirror without reflection. It promises I won't be alone. It says I will be a bride forever. And soon others will join me. They will come and they will say the words, and I will listen. I will hold them. Their love will not leave me. The final sentence had been carved into the page with something sharp. The vows must echo or I am nothing. Halbrook slowly closed the book. She didn't die of heartbreak, he whispered. She became something else. Her vow never met its end, and it kept growing like a vine wrapping around the foundation of the chapel. She wasn't left at the altar, Lily added. She made the altar hers. Outside, the wind picked up. A church bell rang in the distance once then again. But there was no church for miles. Only the bride still waiting. The return to Winderley Chapel was not immediate. Halbrook insisted they stop first at the county courthouse, where they filed a temporary permit to hold a symbolic ceremony on church grounds. He didn't explain why. Lily didn't ask. Deep down, she knew what this was becoming. Not an investigation. A negotiation with something ancient. By dusk the next day, the chapel was quiet again. The police tape had long since been removed. The air inside smelled different now, less like dust, more like dried lilies, the kind found in funeral wreaths. Halbrook stood at the pulpit in a crisp black suit. Lily, in a white blouse and pale skirt, looked down at the velvet box in her hands, the one that had held Eleanor's ring. She had cleaned it gently with a cloth, polished the silver. It sparkled like a secret. This wasn't a real wedding, no guests, no music, only a vow. I'm going to speak the words as she did, Halbrook said, adjusting his tie. But this time we finish them. Together. We make them whole. Maybe then she'll let the others go. You think the spirits are actually trapped? I think they're held, like pearls in a locket, or names etched into a book that won't close. He took a breath and walked to the center aisle. Lily followed. They stood facing each other in the same spot where Eleanor and Jonathan once were beneath the weeping angel-stained glass window. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the far hills. Halbrook began. I, Thomas Halbrook, vow to stand beside you, Lily Merritt, not because the law commands it, but because the heart insists. I vow to protect your memory, even if the world forgets you. I vow. His voice trembled. To finish what was left undone, Lily answered. I vow to see you even when the veil falls. I vow to walk beside you even when the river rises. And I vow to carry your name in mine. She reached out and placed the ring on Halbrook's finger. A gust of wind burst through the chapel. The candles lit themselves. And behind the altar the wall shifted. Not physically, but perceptibly. A narrow arch, long hidden by paneling, began to shimmer into view. A hidden door. As they approached it, the wood peeled away like dried bark. The passage behind led downward into the earth beneath the church. Halbrook clicked on his flashlight. They descended. Stone walls closed in quickly. The staircase spiraled deep. Dampness soaked the air and the smell of lilies intensified, fresh and rotting, layered atop each other. At the bottom, they found a small crypt. Or perhaps something older. Bones lined the walls in patterns, some human, others harder to name. At the center of the floor lay a marble circle engraved with a phrase repeated 12 times. As long as we are unbroken. Lily's breath caught. Are these? Halbrook nodded. All the couples, every pair that vanished. Eleanor didn't just keep them, she collected them. And now we're part of it. Maybe. Or maybe we're the ones meant to end it. As if in response, the air began to hum. One by one, figures appeared in the shadows of the chamber. Faint, translucent. Couples. Each dressed in wedding attire from different eras, 1920s veils, 1950s tuxedos, 1970s boho dresses. And there, near the front, Marissa and Daniel, eyes wide, lips trembling. Marissa stepped forward. She reached out, not to Halbrook, not to Lily, but to the air between them. A single word echoed in the chamber, spoken by a dozen mouths. Finish. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out the music box from Eleanor's time. She opened it. This time there was no tune. Only the soft chime of a bell. The marble beneath their feet cracked, and a light emerged from the broken seal, bright golden, not blinding, but cleansing. The chamber filled with warmth, and the ghosts began to lift, dissolving into threads of silver, drifting upward through the stone. Marissa looked at Lily one last time, mouthed "thank you," and vanished. The last to remain was Eleanor. She stood alone now. No veil, no black dress, only the faded outline of a woman who had waited over a century to be remembered not as a monster, but as a bride who was left behind. She bowed her head and disappeared. The marble closed. The bones fell still, and the chapel above them sighed in relief. Halbrook and Lily stood in silence for several minutes before ascending the stairs again. When they reached the main hall, the candles were out. The stained glass window no longer showed a weeping angel, but a smiling one. Lily whispered, "Do you think it's really over?" Halbrook looked at the ring still on his hand. It was dull now, lifeless. "I think the vow has been heard." Outside, the sky was clearing. The thunder had passed. Birds began to sing in the distance. But as they stepped out onto the chapel steps, Halbrook paused. "Lily, what?" He pointed at the signboard by the road. There, beneath the weather-worn lettering, someone had posted a new banner. Winderley Chapel. Weddings available, starting September 12th. The air felt too light. Lily noticed at first the unnatural stillness as they left Winderley Chapel behind. It wasn't peace. It was something quieter, heavier beneath the silence. Like the way a house feels after someone has screamed inside it. They didn't talk much on the drive back. Halbrook kept glancing at the rearview mirror, as if half expecting the chapel to rise behind them like some forgotten cathedral of bone. 3 days passed. No word of new vanishings. No whispers in the town. But then came the envelope. It arrived at Lily's apartment, tucked inside a plain manila sleeve, no stamp, no return address. The seal was an old-fashioned wax press, a crest she recognized immediately from the Whitgrave family crest in the chapel. Inside a single photo. It was grainy, sepia-toned. The kind developed from a darkroom decades ago, but the people in it were unmistakable. Halbrook and Lily, standing side by side at the altar, wearing the exact clothes from their symbolic ceremony. Except this photo wasn't taken last week. The back read, Winderley Chapel, September 12, 1963. Lily stared at the handwriting for a long time before calling Halbrook. He didn't answer. She drove to his motel, heart racing. The door to room 6 was open. Inside, the room was stripped bare. No papers, no photos, no sign of the whiteboard or the stacks of research. Even the mattress was missing. The only thing left was the wedding ring, Eleanor's ring, sitting in the sink. Cold, blackened. Lily didn't cry, not yet. She drove back into town straight to the Winderley Historical Society and demanded access to the archive room. The clerk, a young woman with an awkward smile and half a sleeve of tattoos, led her into the basement. Lily went straight to the wedding registries. Decades of ceremonies, dozens of names. She searched by year. 1963, there it was. September 12th. Bride Lillian Moret, groom Thomas Halbrook. Her breath caught in her throat. She flipped to the next page. Same date, same time. A note scribbled in the margin. Ceremony not completed. Witnesses reported sudden fog. Couple unaccounted for after chapel doors closed. She staggered backward. This wasn't possible. They had only met 3 months ago. She was born in 1990. There was no way she could have been there, let alone documented in a 60-year-old registry. She grabbed the page and took a photo with her phone before fleeing the building. That night, she tore open every box she had pulled out: family albums, birth records, childhood photos. And there it was again. A photo she had never noticed before. A young woman standing at the edge of a riverbank in an old-fashioned white dress, holding a man's hand. Not her parents. Her. Younger somehow, or older. Time no longer seemed to apply. She looked closer. Behind them in the water was something faint, a shimmer in the surface, like the shape of a building submerged and waiting. A chapel beneath the river. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. One text. You finished the vow. Now it begins again. She dropped the phone. Outside, a knock. Not at the door, at the window. She turned slowly. There stood a man in a black suit. Rain soaked him, but he didn't move. His eyes were sunken. mouth slightly open as if whispering, and on his hand was the same blackened ring she'd left in the motel sink. Halbrook, but not Halbrook. His eyes flicked to the river behind her house, and then he was gone. Only wet footprints on the floorboards where she hadn't opened the door. Lily didn't sleep. She sat on the living room floor until dawn, surrounded by old photos, half-torn marriage records, and the cold weight of something pulling at her from just beyond the veil of comprehension. When light finally broke over the tree line, it did not bring peace, only a clearer view of the footprints that led from her window to the back of the house where they disappeared at the river's edge. The same river where Eleanor and Jonathan vanished. The same river that swallowed the couples of every generation since. The same river she now suspected was not just water, but memory itself, flowing in loops. Her phone buzzed again. A voicemail, unknown number. She pressed play. There was static at first, then Halbrook's voice, calm, but distant, like he was speaking from underwater. Lily. It's me. I don't know how much time I have. Something's wrong with the mirror. It's not a mirror anymore. It sees through time, through us. I tried to close it, but I think... There was a sharp sound like glass cracking, then a whisper unmistakable. Say the vow. The message ended. Lily's hands trembled. She returned to the photo, the one from 1963. She opened the file in editing software, adjusted the contrast, ran a de-aging filter. It wasn't just her and Halbrook. There were two other figures standing behind them in the shadows near the altar. One wore a black wedding gown. The other a hollow-eyed man in formal wear with no face, like it had been wiped. Suddenly everything clicked. The chapel wasn't haunted. It was a machine, a spiritual clockwork fed by vows that were never completed. Every ceremony was an offering, and if the offering failed, if the love was broken or lost, the house fed on it. Halbrook's theory had been incomplete. Eleanor wasn't the first. She was the first known. But the machine had been older than Winderly. And now it had Lily. She tried to leave town that afternoon, packed a bag, keys in hand, car idling. But the GPS wouldn't work. The gas gauge spun in circles. Every road she took led her back to the same intersection, no matter which direction she turned. At the fourth return, she pulled over. Someone was already standing there waiting for her. A young woman in a vintage 1950s bridal dress. Her veil was lifted. Her face was soaked from crying. She stepped toward Lily's car and knocked once on the window, then pressed a handwritten note to the glass. Lily rolled it down. The girl was gone. Only the note remained, ink trembling on damp paper. Don't try to leave. They want a vow. That night Lily returned to the chapel. She had no other choice. It stood silent now, its doors once locked tight with decay opened with ease. Inside the pews were empty but not abandoned. They held impressions, shadows of people who had once sat, once prayed, once wept. At the altar, the veil hung again, but this time it wasn't black. It was white, like a reset. She stepped forward, and there lying on the pulpit was her own name etched into a new guest book. Bride Lillian Moret Groom, Thomas Halbrook, ceremony. Scheduled, September 12, 2025. Today's date. No tomorrows. At exactly midnight, the machine was resetting, and she was at the center of it. Suddenly, a voice behind her. Do you love him? She turned. It was Eleanor. Not a ghost, not quite. A shimmer, a memory still clinging to the shape of flesh. Her dress glowed faintly with the light of the stained glass. Lily stepped back. You're the one keeping them here. No, Eleanor whispered. I'm the one who tried to stop it. I said the vow to no one. That was the sin. It needed to. Lily's mind raced. What happens if I don't say it? Then it will take him again. And the next, and the next. Until it finds the right love. The one that finishes the vow and believes it. Why me? Eleanor tilted her head. Because you're the first to love someone after seeing what this place really is. And with that, she vanished. The church bells tolled once. Lily looked at the guest book again. She had less than 24 hours. To find Halbrook. To end the vow. Or become the next name etched in silence. The chapel loomed behind her like a breath she couldn't release. But Lily didn't go back inside. Not yet. Instead, she ran. She needed air. She needed space that wasn't touched by veils and vows and the echo of voices not quite dead. She needed someone who hadn't yet been touched by this, and she knew exactly where to go. The Winderley Library stood at the edge of the historic district, quiet and near forgotten, but its basement housed something few people remembered: a collection of pre-township folklore writings and carvings from the area before Winderley even had a name. She remembered it from a school field trip when she was 12. An old woman in a red scarf had whispered to the class, "These are not fairy tales. These are warnings." Now she wondered if that woman had ever left. The librarian on duty was a wiry man named Colton. He blinked slowly when she asked for access to the folklore archive. "You're the girl from the chapel," he said. Lily froze. "How do you know that?" He slid the access key across the desk. "Because they all come here. The ones who hear the vow. The ones who see their name appear before they speak it. You're not the first." She didn't ask who they were. Downstairs, the air was cooler, damper, the kind of air that hadn't moved in decades. She pulled gloves from her coat and began flipping through the oldest box marked pre-1830 ritual sites. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she found it. A charcoal rubbing of a stone circle carved deep into a riverbed. Symbols she had seen once before in the basement beneath the chapel. A small scribbled note in the margin, site presumed destroyed by flooding in 1842. Original name, Veldamara, translated the place where promises must be paid. Another page torn and bound separately showed a mirror made of obsidian black as ink buried inside a hollow stone resembling a church. Lily traced the sketch. There was no caption, but below it a single phrase had been added in red ink. "When love is taken before it's tested, the vow becomes the debt." Her breath caught. She pulled out her phone, checked the time, 11:24 p.m. 36 minutes left, and she still didn't know where Halbrook was. Unless... She opened the photo again, the 1963 ceremony, the one that shouldn't exist. She zoomed in on the faint outline of the couple behind them. There was something in the bride's hand. A mirror, not just reflective obsidian, like in the sketch. She ran back upstairs, nearly colliding with Colton. "Do you know where that mirror is?" His face was pale. "You don't go to the mirror, Lily. It comes to you." And then, as if summoned, the chime rang out again. Not a church bell. Not music. The bell from the music box. Except now she didn't have it with her. She turned in a circle, heart pounding. The windows in the library had all fogged over. Words began to etch across the glass from the inside. "Say the vow." She backed away slowly. And there he was. Halbrook, standing just beyond the threshold of the front doors, not wet, not worn, but not fully real. His outline shimmered like heat above asphalt. "Lily." He whispered, his voice not coming from his mouth but inside her ears. "I remember everything. I've seen every version of us, in every year, and every time we almost finish it, one of us disappears." She stepped closer. "Then what are you now?" "I'm the part that stayed, the part that refused to let go." "Are you still him?" "I'm what's left." Tears burned her eyes. "You said the mirror sees through time, through us." He nodded. "It's not about finishing the vow. It's about meaning it in a place that only understands loss." The library lights flickered. Books began sliding off the shelves one by one. And then Lily saw it. In the reflection of the glass door not facing her, but in reverse, her own reflection turned and smiled. A different her. Veiled. Married. Empty-eyed. Lily whispered, "What if I don't go?" Halbrook looked at her, not pleading, just waiting, and said, "Then I go again and you'll follow. Next year, next life, you always do." A tear slipped down her cheek. "What happens if we both say it and walk away?" "No one's ever tried." She looked down at her hand. The ring Eleanor's was on her finger again. She hadn't put it there. It was warm. Alive. She reached for the door. Halbrook stepped back. Together they stood in the moonlight at 11:59 p.m. hand in hand and faced the chapel, now shimmering at the river's edge, half built of stone, half of memory. And they spoke. Together. "I vow not to forget. I vow not to fear. I vow to walk forward with love that doesn't need chains to last. A gust of wind tore through the town. The mirror shattered. The reflection the other Lily screamed as she split into dust. And then silence. The chapel folded in on itself like paper burning backward. And when it was gone, only the river remained. Still. Unbothered. Free. The river was still. It hadn't been this quiet in decades. The trees stood motionless, as if even the wind dared not disturb what had just happened. The chapel was gone, burned away by a vow that wasn't chained to ritual, but chosen freely. Lily and Halbrook stood at the river's edge, hand in hand, watching the ripples fade, believing they had finally ended it. For the first time since Eleanor and Jonathan's names were etched in mystery, there was peace. They left Winderley the next morning, heading south, no destination in mind. Just away. The roads no longer looped. GPS worked. Phones rang with real people on the other end. And for a brief golden stretch of weeks, they allowed themselves to believe they were free. 2 months later, a boy fishing along the banks of the very river where it all began cast his line too far and hooked something heavy beneath the silt. When his father helped him pull it in, they expected a tire or maybe an old log. Instead, they found cloth. Thick soaked cloth wrapped around metal clasps and silk trim. The police were called. When the object was finally retrieved in full, it made headlines across the county. A wedding dress. And a black tuxedo. Perfectly preserved by mud and cold water, sealed in a large zippered garment bag. The strange part wasn't that it had survived. The strange part was the make. Modern. Too modern. The stitching wasn't from the 1990s. The dress was hand-embroidered in a style that hadn't existed until at least 2020. The tag on the vest said, "Tailored in Arizona, 2024." And inside the breast pocket was a name handwritten on a small linen square. L. Merritt Halbrook. Lily. Back in a quiet town in southern Oregon, Lily stood at a kitchen sink drying her hands. The sunlight was warm, and Halbrook was in the backyard planting something in the garden, his sleeves rolled up dirt on his knees. They laughed when the dog stole his trowel and ran off with it. Life had become small and peaceful until a letter arrived. No postmark, no return address. Just her name. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single Polaroid. A photo of the wedding dress and vest pulled from the river, laid out on a steel table under fluorescent lights, and a note beneath it typed in red ink. "Your loop has not ended, it only widened." She dropped the envelope. Her breath caught. Outside, Halbrook suddenly stopped what he was doing. He turned to her slowly, his eyes distant. "Did you feel that he said—" What Lily asked. But she already knew. The sky darkened not from clouds, but as if something immense had passed overhead without sound. The wind picked up, and in the distance they heard it. A bell. Not a church bell, not the music box. The chapel bell. But the chapel was gone. Wasn't it? She looked toward the woods, where trees stood tall and ancient, unchanged for centuries. But there, in a clearing that hadn't existed yesterday, something new was taking shape. Stone walls. A spire. Glass windows that hadn't yet been installed. The chapel was building itself again. Or had never truly left. Lily backed away. Halbrook stood frozen. A new realization took root in her mind. The vow they had spoken wasn't an end. It had simply restarted the cycle from a different angle. A wider loop. One that pulled from future versions of themselves, from places they hadn't yet reached. Their garments hadn't fallen into the river because they died. They'd fallen because they were meant to, because even now, somewhere ahead in time, it was still happening. There was no final wedding, only rehearsals. The river didn't care when, only that it was paid. Lily whispered, "We didn't break it." Halbrook turned to her face, pale. "We fed it." And in the woods, the wind whispered one final time, "Say the vow. Thank you for joining us on this haunting journey. If this story moved you, chilled you, or made you question time itself, please subscribe to Han's Story for more mind-bending fictional mysteries. Like this video if it sent a shiver down your spine. Comment below. What do you think the chapel really is? And most importantly, Share this story with someone who loves the strange, the dark, and the unforgettable. Until the next vow.